Hey, 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 welcome back, man. We're here, we're doing it again. I don't know how long this guy can keep it going, but we're rolling. We are rolling. NFFL tonight, we're doing it again. Talking about games played in week 8 this time around. Cut the music there, Maestro. Thanks a lot. Coming at you live from downtown, looks like, huh? Got the whole New York City tuning into the NFFL tonight. This thing's getting huge, so watch out. But anyway, thanks for coming back. I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope you're enjoying the recaps that we're doing. But again, yeah, we're talking about games played in Week 8. Before we get into that, a couple points of clarification I wanted to touch on. First of all, I told you about the World Series, didn't I? They pushed it out there another couple of games, or I guess an extra game by getting one win in the series. But when they beat Cliff Lee the first time, I knew it was over. But hey, congratulations to the San Francisco Giants. I don't know if any of you guys are into baseball or what the deal is there, but if you're a Giants fan, congratulations on the first title for that town and the first one for the Giants organization in over 50 years. But anyway, let's get right into football. I wanted to touch base or clarify something I talked to the commissioner about. In my recaps, we've talked about tiebreakers based on points scored for the year as like a cumulative total type of thing. That's actually inaccurate. That is a criteria that's used for tie-breaking, but that's after a couple of other things, in my understanding here. What was explained to me was that it's based on very first and foremost the head-to-head record between the teams that are tied. Okay, if there is a head-to-head. So if you only played the person once and you beat them, you got the tie-break. If you've played them twice and you beat them twice, obviously you have the tie-break. If you played them twice and you're 1-1, then I believe it's based on the points scored between the two of you during head-to-head games. So again, as the season progresses and closer to the playoffs, I'll do more to break that down and give you a clear-cut picture as we're going through these last few weeks of who's got these final seeds and who doesn't. I mean, right now it's pretty clear the first 5 are pretty well set. They're, a game ahead right at the moment. Things can change, obviously, and there's a lot of matchups between these teams. But that bottom seed is the one that's really locked up right now between a couple of teams, actually 3 teams that are sitting at that 3-5 record. And we'll get into more of that as we go through the recaps. But we'll get right to it here, starting off with our top flight high point producer of the week. That was, again, our guy Buffalo. Number 1 seed in the league for several weeks now, and he's now the highest scoring team in our league by a pretty substantial margin. So once again in Week 8, he takes on the Rattlers, who's up and down team all year long. He takes out maybe some frustration from their previous matchup there by posting a 121 and wins the game 121-51, mostly on the backs of these 3 key guys. Phillip Rivers with 29 points. Calvin Johnson shows up huge in that game, 9 for 101, 3 touchdowns. If you watch the game, there's actually some points left on the field, unfortunately. There was a play where it was a broken play. Stafford is back in the lineup for the Lions. He eludes the pass rush, breaks free. Calvin Johnson is trying to stay alive for his quarterback, takes a short route, turns it into a downfield route. You run that out pattern, and things are falling apart in the pocket, and you break it off deep, and the guy's left chasing you, and the quarterback's just going to lob it up over the secondary. Well, everything was going fine for another huge play, and I mean, this thing would have been bonus point banana. Anyway, Stafford throws it up, and it's too short. It's knocked down and incomplete, because you're talking about another huge touchdown catch for Calvin Johnson that's not even taken advantage of. And of course that would have been his 10th catch. So there's a lot of points for Calvin that were left on the field. Even so, did okay. 9 catches, 101 yards, 3 touchdown grabs. They were all short ones, but hey, that's kind of cool to see that Calvin's the go-to guy down there in the red zone, as well he should be at 6'5", 240. So huge game for him there. And then also it was Gates, usual suspects there. Rivers and Gates combined to put up 54 points. So that's going to pretty much take care of, alone, that takes care of Rattlers on this particular week. When Schaub takes the week off against, a pretty soft Colts defense and can only muster 200 yards and a touchdown. But unfortunately with that, he puts up a pick and a fumble. So tough week for Rattlers. I mean, the only other double digit she looked at was Mason Crosby putting up 13 from the kicker slot. and there was just too much Buffalo Bills lineup. So Buffalo, again, he moves to 7-1. He's number 1 seed right now. He's tied for the best record with the Killer Whales. Buffalo's playing Silver Bullets in next week here. He's the number 4 ranked team in our league. I mentioned earlier, Jeremy, Buffalo owners got top points scored this year, 859 points. One of only 3 teams to average over 100 points on a game-by-game basis here now 8 weeks through the season. For the Rattlers, she's dropping down to 2-6 and is taking on the Geek Masters here in the this week's game. As far as like the bye weeks, obviously that's always a big thing. Some bye news for the Rattlers. She's going to be losing Noshawn Moreno and Vernon Davis, who's one of her, frequently top scoring players. They're going to be taking the week off. Looking at the Buffalo squad, some changes there. Dwayne Bowe's going to take a seat against a pretty decent Oakland Raiders pass defense, although with Asamoah potentially out with a sprained ankle, that may not be the case, especially for Dwayne Bowe and what he's been doing lately. But Steve Smith at the moment's in the starting lineup for Buffalo. I can understand why. He's playing against Seattle, and Seattle's defense hasn't been bad this year against the run, okay? But they are giving up 24 points a week on average to wide receivers right now, fantasy points that is, so not necessarily a terrible start. When you look at the Buffalo squad, you got Brandon Lloyd on a bye week, which he was on the bench last week anyway, scoring 27 points out in London against the 49ers, so imagine if you stick that into Buffalo's lineup for last week. But I guess the point is he's pretty deep right now at wide receiver, and he's having a hard time just figuring out who to put in, and quite frankly, at the moment, it doesn't seem to matter. That's pretty much what we're looking at there. For Linda, again, we talk about some bye week deals. She's looking at Devon Best, too, in the starting lineup here again this week so far anyway. She does have Deshaun Jackson coming back off of not only a concussion, but a bye week, playing against the Colts defense. They're allowing about 21 points a week to wide receivers for fantasy stats. And she's got Devon Best in there against Baltimore, which seems silly. I'll tell you what, though, if you look at the stats, Baltimore's given up 23 points a week to wide receivers from a fantasy standpoint. So Baltimore's defense is not what it's been in some past years. At least it hasn't been up to this point. We'll talk a little bit more about them and who recently picked them up off the free agency scrap heap, which was very surprising to me, but it ended up happening. So anyway, that's breaking down that top scoring game of the week. Again, it was Buffalo 121, Rattlers 51, and we'll move on from there. Next game we're going to look at here is Big Dog took on the Raiders in Week 8. Pretty important game for the Raiders, who find themselves up against the wall as far as playoffs goes. Once you get to 5 losses, you're pretty much got to shut off the losses or you're going to be in trouble. I mean, you might sneak in, you might backdoor it at 6-6, but it's not a place you want to hang out. So right now at 3-5, the Raiders, who just ended up beating the Big Dog, I didn't even mention that, but it was 95-41 debacle. Raiders went ahead and rolled that over, put up 95 points en route to go into a 3-5 record, tied for that 6th seed right now in terms of record. Of course, doesn't have the tiebreak right now over the person who holds the 6th seed, which is the Nutbuster. But this week coming up, another big game. These are the ones you got to win. Raiders is playing Voodoo. Voodoo's struggling right now. Although I'll tell you what, if you look at his starting lineup for this week, it looks somewhat formidable, okay, on paper. But Voodoo is who Raiders playing this time around. Raiders has played Voodoo already this season in Week 7 and won that game 91. I think it was 91-86. What I have listed here. So at any rate, Raiders definitely won the game, and it was close. So, different bye weeks this time. There's really no big bye week issues to mention for Raiders this time through. I don't know what we were looking at in Week 7, but this time around, Raiders is at full strength and is going to be able to put in whatever he deems to be the best possible lineup. As far as Big Dog goes, again, tough week. Things not looking great for old Big Dog there. Tony Romo takes a shot when a rookie fullback forgets to pick up a blitzing linebacker. Imagine that. Romo's gone. So we got Carson Palmer, right? Puts up 17 of the 41 points that Big Dog was the score this week. Not a terrible week, but again, with Carson Palmer, it's so up and down. And it was a matchup that against Miami that maybe you didn't look at it and say, this is a great matchup for Carson Palmer. So he manages only 156 yards with a couple of touchdowns, and then he throws that pick. He always seems to find a way to get that pick in there, and this week was no exception. He's also looking at Adrian Peterson for the week, scoring 20 points. Again, that's a pretty standard week out of Adrian. Pretty good season, though, going so far for Peterson. This was 92 yards rushing, 50 receiving, which is a little bit different for him, with a touchdown. So not a terrible week out of those two guys, but there's really nothing else else to mention after that, unless you want to talk about the fact that the Seattle Seahawks subtracted 6 points from Big Dog's total this week. Kind of, again, tough week. But hey, guess who's back? Roddy White's back. Guess who they're playing? Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, not great against the passing game. Going to be a pretty nice week for old Roddy, I'd say. So again, Big Dog still sitting there at 5-3, number 3 seed, firmly planted, taking on the Killer Whale this week, so he's going to need Roddy White and about everything else that he can bring with him. Killer Whale is his opponent coming forward here. Killer Whale played the Big Dog in Week 1 and won that game pretty decisively, 117-89. So Big Dog looking for revenge, maybe? Okay. And another thing a little to mention here on Big Dog, who is actually not losing much on bye week, so I guess Tony Romo's on a permanent bye week, but at any rate, Big Dog is still, despite the 41-point output, one of only 3 teams in our league to average over 100 points a week. So we talked about Buffalo being in that crew. Big Dog's right there at the 3rd rank. He's got the same thing going, over 100 points a game for the season on average so far. Let's move on. Next game we're going to talk about here was the Killer Whales. We talked a lot about him earlier, playing against Silver Bullets. Pretty big game. This was 2 versus 4. Okay, those teams come out of this game still ranked 2 and 4, respectively. That is. Killer Whales, after the win here, 85-55 over the Silver Bullets, 7-1 record. Again, still 2 ranked, number 2 ranked, I should say. He's taken on, as we just mentioned, Big Dog in Week 3. He did beat Big Dog in Week 1, so he's got that going for him. A little bit of history, right? And Killer Whale is the 3rd and final team in the league. We talk again, those Buffalo, Big Dog, now Killer Whale. Those are the 3 teams in the league, and the only 3 teams in our league that are averaging at or above 100 points per game. That's pretty impressive, and it's hard to sustain that because you do take some nasty 41-point games here and there, and this was not Killer's best output at 85, but still averaging over 100 points a week is still pretty impressive. Well done to Killer Whale's crew on that. Again, we talked about bye weeks for the rest of these teams, and if you look at the Killer Whales lineup, there's really nothing that's going to be missing here for him in Week 9. I did want to mention in his starting lineup, though, here posted as it stands right now on the website, he's got a couple of guys that weren't even on his team last week in the starting lineup. That's the tight end from Chicago, Olsen, and that Ravens defense I mentioned. Again, surprised the heck out of me to see that they were even in the free agency scrap heap. I looked at the numbers, though, not having a great year, but I'm telling you, they're still the Ravens. If you look at their stats, there's at least 2 sacks a week in that number. Those things turn into fumbles, turn into defensive touchdowns. I like what he did being able to pick up that Ravens D, and I'm quite irritated at myself for not doing it, to be quite honest with you. But at any rate, good pickups there. Olsen, I had Olsen. He wasn't doing a whole hell of a lot, but you know what? It's the talent's there. He's Cutler's buddy. They're roommates. It could turn into something pretty big. So that's what Dave's looking at for next week. And then Silver, we talked about, tough week for him. Only was able to roll up 55 points in the loss, but again, at 4-4, he's still ranked 4th in the league. Safely within the playoff rankings right now. Got a huge game coming up against a very tough opponent in Buffalo. That's not going to be easy, obviously, as we've mentioned so many times today that Buffalo is number 1 in record, number 1 in points scored. The guy is on a roll right now. This is the first of 2 meetings between these 2 guys in the last 4 weeks, so there's some very exciting action going to be going on between Buffalo and the Silver Bullets here to end the season. And these games look like some make-or-break games for both of these guys, because again, if Silver Bullets can rattle off a couple of wins over Buffalo toward the end, that really starts to change some things in the seeding and where these guys end up. At this point in time, when you look at Silver, again, for bye week issues going forward, not a whole lot. He's actually getting a lot more back than he's losing. He's picking up, looks like Michael Vick this week's going to go ahead and get the start against the Colts. Probably not a bad idea. LaShawn McCoy is going to be back running against that very, very soft Colts run defense. What he's losing is just really the biggest thing is Chris Johnson. First-round pick is going to be taken to bye week. And his new partner in crime, Randy Moss, couldn't do it with the New England Patriots, couldn't do it with Minnesota, going to try to do it with Tennessee. He's going to get a bye week after all here this week to see if he can't get himself back on track.